You are listening to the INCJ podcast, Conversations about International Criminal Justice.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our International Network Criminal Justice podcast. Uniquely, this is being co-produced with a Chinese podcast called Prison Desires. So, hello to new listeners. We hope you enjoy this interview and the international cross-boundary nature of INCJ. This is the first episode in a series we're calling Just Arts, when leading arts practitioners are invited to share their work with offenders in prison and community settings. In conversation about their experiences and different perspectives, we hope to draw inspiration and new ideas from around the world. My name's John Scott, and my job today is to introduce our guest and to let her tell her own story, which stretches from Shanghai in China to Leicester in the UK, and includes an awful lot of study, learning about the arts and criminology, and along the way, podcasting. So a warm welcome to Xiaoye Zhang. Now, I have to say, I've had quite a lot of trouble learning her name, and I guess some of our listeners might as well. So she's been forcing me to practice. But anyway, welcome to Xiaoye. She is currently a senior lecturer at the Montfort University in Leicester, UK. Xiaoye, welcome. I want you to say something about where you're working now and what your current job is. So, hi, let's get cracking.
Hi, John. Thank you so much for having me here and for planning the Just Arts podcast series, which we will talk about a bit more later. And hello to all the listeners here at INCJ. My name is Xiaoye Zhang, the full name. And as John said, I'm currently working as a senior lecturer of criminology here at the Montfort University in Leicester in the UK. And currently my work is mostly twofold, as most lecturers are in universities, mostly teaching criminology modules. I am now module leading for two modules. One is for first year freshman university students on their first ever course on this program. So introducing them about studying university and studying criminology. And the second module is for second year on communities of justice, which is mostly a module about criminal justice systems focusing on prison and punishment, rehabilitation and desistance. So that's the two main modules, courses that I'm working on now. And I'm also conducting my own research. So yeah, that's my current work.
Okay, now what if I was to ask you what your main interests in criminology were? What would you say?
Yeah, so I would say my main interest is more to do with what happens during and after punishment, rather than what most people imagine criminology to be, which is investigation and conviction. So I'm more interested in the aftermath, in the sociology of punishment. Why do we punish? How it's done? How is it done in different contexts, in different eras? And then how that feeds back into possible future offending. As we know, it's a cycle. So more interested in that aspect.
And what are you currently writing about, Xiaoye?
To be honest, I'm currently writing my ethical application form, which is taking a long time. So yeah, I'm having to go through a lot of institutional application for my future research, but I'm also working on my first book ever. It's not a very recent project. It's gonna be based on my PhD research. I have published journal articles from that project, but because it's a ethnographic research, so it's quite narrative, it's quite story based. I thought it'd still be a good idea to have it published as a monograph. Um, so yeah, that's what I'm gonna be doing for the coming year and a half on top of teaching
Now,
mostly.
it sounds to me that it's actually quite hard for you to do this ethical application stuff. Is that a cultural demand that you've not had before?
Definitely, yeah. I think it's if we're gonna talk about like challenges coming working cross context, I think that's probably the biggest because I've had ethics before because I obtained my master's of in applied theater. We'll talk about my studies in a bit, but
Mm.
so I've had ethical approval for going into prison internationally from Goldsmiths previously, but that's like a decade ago. And I obtained ethics for my PhD as well, which was in Hong Kong. But since then, I've not had any dealings with institutional ethical committee because in China, social science research do not need to go through them, at least in the university that I worked in. Um, and coming back here, I've realized that ethical application, data management, all that has changed so much in the past decade since I last applied for it. So yeah, it's a huge challenge.
Right, learning curve, we say. Let's be positive. You're learning new skills.
I try, yeah.
Right. Well, we may come on to some of those new skills, but let's start with how did you become a criminologist in the first place?
Okay, so first of all, I think I identify as a criminologist only to the extent that in terms of disciplinary categorization. Personally, in terms of research, I don't really brand myself as a criminologist that often on a daily basis. For me, I'm just interested in social phenomenons and issues and conflict that has to do with crime. Um, Probably a lot of our listeners who works in criminal justice will understand that already. It is a hugely interdisciplinary field of interest. And so I came to criminology from my master's studies, which I've just mentioned. I did applied theater, which is a quite niche subject in Goldsmiths, and my master's dissertation was conducted in a Chinese prison. Because I was really fascinated and it was very short. I wanted to explore more and I thought I was rather good at it. So I applied for my PhD scholarship to study in Hong Kong, and that is specifically in criminology. So yeah, that's how I came
So, in a
across.
way, you had to narrow down because you were captured with how interesting the
Mm.
arts and drama were in a criminological setting.
Definitely. I think prison is my keyword for sure. It's it's what I see in prison or what I see in prison studies. I see that it's a very theatrical place to start with. People have costumes, they have roles, right? They have kind of certain social script, they have power structures, there's lots of conflicts, there's a routine. So from the onset, I think marrying crime and punishment with theater or performance studies is just such a rich direction to take, endless possibilities. And so I just thought that I can do this
Well,
life and
I
I want, yeah.
well, I think you're flagging up how rich this series of podcasts can be, because it's drawn you into almost a whole life of study. And I'm hoping other people will think, oh, what's this going to all be about? I'm wanting to go back to the beginning because where do you come from? What did you study at school that ended you up getting into both drama and criminology? It is absolutely fascinating to see what journey you've been on.
Yeah, I think my journey of growing up and studying are quite pretty unconventional and different. I've kind of jumped between many different disciplines, but when I'm asked, I can always provide a pretty coherent logic behind. So I've studied for my when I was in high school, my dream job for a long time, probably since I was in secondary school, high school, always through my teenage years, I wanted to be a journalist, wanted to be an investigative journalist. I've always had a lot of influence, I guess, from my mom about caring for social justice, about caring for injustice, about questioning the status quo, questioning what is crime, who gets to decide, etc. Pretty critical thinking that I grew up with. So for a long time, I wanted to be an investigative journalist. And then for my undergrad study, I did not do that well for college entrance exam. And that's just life, right? You don't always get to do what you want. There's reality as well. So I had to choose kind of short notice learning about my not so successful grades. And so I chose something that I know pretty well already. And I felt like it gave me space to explore what I really want to do while having a degree. So I chose English because I did my year 10 in England. I spent a year in England, so my English is relatively good compared to others who's not never studied abroad. And that's what I did for undergrad. To be honest, I barely attended lectures. I tell my student that, but that's because I'm consistently top three in my class. So I had some excuse. And then I went
I'm
off.
not sure your students need to hear this. Um,
But
and and your
I went
English
off.
is unbelievably good. So
Thank
I can see how you got away with it.
you. Thank you. Yeah, so I did lots of exploring in undergrad. I did intern in magazines and newspapers. I interned in one of the best newspaper in China. Um, and also I explored other work with charities, with people, different groups of people. And I have to say, I come from a very liberal, very open-minded family. Both my parents were university lecturers, and they do not really care about what I want to do with my life. So I had a lot of freedom. I can do really whatever I want. So after undergrad, I didn't know what to do because interning in those two media outlets actually wasn't exactly what I imagined. And as many listeners would know, that in China, there's lots of censorship around reporting and journalism. So if I really chose that path, it is incredibly hard and frustrating and potentially risky. So I decided to take up a gap year to figure out what I want. And that took me back to England. Um, I guess it's also because when I came here during year 10, that really had a long lasting impact because I see the individualism in the UK. which is you can be yourself, you can choose what you want to do. There is no one definition of a good life and a good job. So yeah, so that enabled me to have the courage to explore different things rather than securing a job quickly after I graduate.
I'm I'm interested that you describe your home life as liberal, and I guess having both your parents being involved in the world of university. What subjects were they? Both arts professors,
No.
or what sort of subjects did they study?
Um, I'm really rubbish at both of their subjects, so they have not passed on their genes whatsoever. My mom's a physics, and I barely passed physics in school. Like I'm really bad with math, physics, chemistry. My dad is similar. He's in finance, so a lot of math involved. I didn't get any of that, so yeah, that's what they did.
Well, you've still been able to fly, so that's all that matters. Okay. But they encouraged you to be, it sounds to me, creative and adventurous. When you read English, did drama studies feature more than, say, the novel or poetry?
Um, I think my love for theater, and actually I considered studying playwriting for my undergrad. But eventually I didn't. I think it was probably from the influence from my mom rather than from my studies. I've been going to the theater and more independent theater as well from the age of probably 11, 10. Um, and a lot of them are pretty provocative. They have a political undertone to them. So I think that's also where I kind of began seeing theater as a medium that often cross over with social science, with discussing social issues.
Hmm. And at university, is that the same, that there's an undercurrent of politics when you're studying as well?
I would say I stayed in the margins of university life. I think because I've developed a lot of my own thinking that are probably quite critical or different from the um, mainstream lifestyle or life choices or educational style in the university. I don't feel like I've gained that much from university itself. It's more that what I did on my own during that time.
So can I just examine that a little bit? Because in a way, we are talking about your journey, and you sound quite independent to me. Um, so are students very conforming then? To be able to make progress, you have to fit a certain mold in
Mm.
China.
I think in China, the central theme for education, whether it's for students, for parents, for teachers, university lecturers, it's all it's all has to do with anxieties over career perspective or making a good living. Like I mentioned previously, coming to the UK, I've met a variety of quote weird people. They might be in their 50s and they're going back to university or they're changing career path. And it made me realize that that's okay. Because in China, the main most people around me would think that that's absurd. There is good life, there's good job, which means stability, good income, working for probably like as a civil servant or government. So they have a quite a narrow, I'd say, a collective mindset in terms of what is good life and what is a good job and marriage and children, etc. So they backtrack that into education system. So they're thinking, okay, in order to get that life, or in order to avoid not getting that life, which might mean poverty, not buying houses, not being able to get married, all sorts of things. What I need to do now. So it's backtracking. Okay, now I have to get into the top 10 primary schools for my kids, and then I need to get into the top 5 secondary schools, and then I need to get to what kind of university. And when they're in the university, they're gonna think what kind of certificate I need to get in order to secure a job in the market, specifically targeting the good jobs that they want. So it works more in that way.
So it's very competitive, but it's also very conforming.
Yeah.
And did you feel like you were rebelling, or did you feel I'm just quietly going to go my own way?
I think both my parents were much more rebellious than me, so I've had good role models. They yeah, they both actually left the university as well. Um, so I think it's learning by example. They've never told me to be rebellious, nor did they tell me to conform. They didn't really tell me anything. Um, so I guess the major difference between me and some of my friends, my peers or families, is that we probably put more focus on finding the inner interest and finding the true motivation in life. Like, what do you want to do? What gets you going? What are you passionate about? Um, and I believe, and I tell my student that all the time, whether in China or here, once you find that, it actually gives you the edge in the employment market because people with passion are going to be better at their jobs, and employers will see that. But if you're only anxious about falling behind, then you don't have time to explore what do you really want to do. So at one point, you're going to wake up and realize, what is this all for? So actually, it's counterproductive. So I think that's the biggest difference.
Okay, so in a way, fulfillment,
Mm.
uh, inspiration was what you were searching for, not uh, getting on the rungs of a ladder and going through the motions. I get that. So you got an undergraduate degree. You then thought, I want to stay in this world. The original idea to be a journalist got moved to one side, possibly because of the difficulties of investigative work in a Chinese setting. So what decided you to focus on the theatre in a prison setting? I mean, that's really very narrow, but really interesting. How did that happen?
To be honest, it's because I saw that on the website. Goldsmiths had this module, this program. But of course, there's not just Goldsmiths that runs it. You can study applied theatre across a variety of UK institutions like Warwick, Central Speech and Drama, etc. But Goldsmiths was one of them, and I initially applied and received an offer for master degree in anthropology. But then I gave up once I saw applied theater. I told them that I found something more fun. Can I get that instead? They're like, yes, it's fine. So for anthropology, I think it's quite natural because, as I mentioned, I grew up in the family that everyone cared a lot about social issues and politics, and I've always had a huge curiosity of understanding society. So anthropology, again, I think it crosses over with my long-standing wish to be a journalist, is to investigate human being, investigate the world we're living. And then I chose applied theater because it's not just a traditional theater major. It's very interdisciplinary that crosses between education, theater studies, social work, sociology, and you can go on political science, etc. As you please, how you put the puzzles together. So that's what interests me, is that the marrying of the two interests I have. I can't say I was passionate about theater. I definitely love it. Um, but yeah, but so that's basically why I saw the interest in crossing over the two disciplines.
Okay, so listening, I'm hearing that it's bringing together fun and seriousness.
Mm.
All right.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think having I never imagined myself studying arts, to be honest, because I think growing up in China, I always had a quite narrow definition of who goes off and studying arts. They're either artists who were born to create art piece, or they're like really good looking people that turned out to be actors and actresses. And I didn't feel that I was either. I didn't feel that I'm so talented. I mean, I can create, but I just didn't think that I was a born artist. But applied theater gives me a third option where I can enjoy and share artistic means and combining that with my care of social issues.
And crossing over between the arts and social science is going to be a theme of these episodes, I think. So
Yeah.
you are a living embodiment of that, but equally, we want to do crossing over between different cultures. And also, interestingly, I think you're a good embodiment of that. So let's imagine we've taken a leap and you've come back to the UK to do a master's. Um, and I think you then go back to China to do a PhD. Uh, I'm going to ask you a hard question. What's the difference in criminology between China and, let's say, Europe and the USA? Can you capture that for us?
I think the biggest difference between, well, first of all, I did my PhD in Hong Kong. So criminology in Hong Kong and in mainland China are vastly different. I would probably categorize China as in one category, and then Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, the rest of Asia, probably most many East Asian countries, um, as similar to North America in terms of discipline. I'll explain in a bit, and then Europe will be third category. So the three of them are quite different. But China has the biggest distance difference from the other two in terms of in China, criminology is not a social science subject at all. It is categorized as law degree and is categorized as a sub discipline of criminal law. So none of my colleagues, when I went back to work for a criminology team in China, had social science training. And our modules for the students does not really involve that. They might have electives on social science methods, but essentially, criminology students is very similar to that of a law students in terms of training. And in terms of research, many of my colleagues in Chinese criminal justice departments would be looking at it from a legal perspective rather than going out doing interviews, learning about real life criminal justice situations. So that's the biggest difference.
Okay, so is that to do with statute, and it's to do with the rigor of a state that sets up expectations and doesn't really want to vary from norms and isn't really interested in the social justice aspects, is more interested in conformity?
To be honest, I think that could be a research on its own.
Okay, right. Well,
Uh,
let's do it. Let's do it together, Xiaoye. Okay.
yeah, so yeah, I've thought about it. I think it's probably a bit of both. So that's to do with the disciplinary history. So to start with, social science the categorization and naming of disciplines
Mm.
has always been as its history, and I think that's very much linked to institutional policies or institutional um, distribution of resources. So that might not necessarily have to do with actual knowledge production or even the policing of knowledge. So it's just because legal studies and social science study, all those disciplinary naming and categorizations are not native to Chinese knowledge production anyway. These things are from the West to start with. And exactly at what point was it a misunderstanding? Did they think, oh, because, criminology is related to law, of course, there would be no criminology without criminal law. So maybe there was lost in translation. They just thought that it must be categorized under criminal law. I mean, what else could it be? Or is it also because there's avoidance to look into social justice, social science aspects of punishment? That could also be the case. But I think I will have to do some digging if I want to answer that question.
Well, I look forward to the article.
Thank you.
So that was the first part of your answer.
Mm.
Thanks. Let's move to the second, which is to see maybe American or UK perspectives on
Yeah.
criminology.
Um, I have not worked in North American institutions, so I can only answer from my sideline observation. My general observation, and that's also why I chose to apply for work coming back as a lecturer in the UK. It's a conscious decision. I've chose not to go back to Hong Kong. Not that I could be competitive. And Hong Kong nowadays is very, very competitive in terms of academia job market. Um, but I think the major difference from my understanding is North American and Hong Kong and Singapore criminology are predominantly quantitative, and they are very much after top journal publications. They have high salaries, which means high expectations for institutional contribution in terms of ranking. And when I studied in Hong Kong, that was constantly taught to us that we need to care about institutional ranking, that we need to publish better journal articles with better impact factors for the university to gain a better ranking. Um, and I think that has a huge impact on what kind of research you do. I remember, do you know Pat Carlin? Pat Carlin, I think that's her name. Sorry if I pronounce it. She's one of the best female criminology researchers in the UK. She's retired now. She's published a lot on female women's prisons, etc., and very critical. So she came over to Hong Kong and gave a lecture at my department. And my colleagues was like, we can't afford doing what we like because we need to be chasing impact factors and numbers. So that's a whole mindset. And I don't really agree that you don't have a choice. And also, I think, what's the point then if you can't be the kind of researcher you want to be? And in China, it's similar with the third category in the North American institutional requirement in terms of we also have quotas. So I have quotas on what's the minimum you have to publish every year or during your period of your contract. If you don't meet the minimum requirement and everything is quantified by numbers. So which tier of journal you're publishing equals to different numbers of points. So it's a point systems, exactly the same as in prison, how they govern prisoners. It's a point system, and you have a lot of requirements. So that I think that they've learned from North America and from Hong Kong, where as in Europe, including the UK, as far as I know from my experience and from people I know, there is not as much as that strict number-based quota system. So you have a bit more breathing space to explore and to do things from interest, like this podcast series that John and we're probably going to do. In China, I would really struggle to do this, probably just because it might take up my time where I need to contribute to the quota. So I need to decide from my limited time what what I'm doing with it, and institutional requirement significantly impact that decision.
So choice is part of the cultural difference, but also creating accessible material. To a
And
certain extent, what we'll be doing is creating material that non-academics might be really interested in.
Yeah, but from institutional impact perspective, for example, in the UK, you have REF and TEF as well, but it's not emphasized or chased to the same degree in some other contexts. I think in the UK, institutions still recognize different forms of knowledge contribution. So you have knowledge exchange, where you might be writing a policy paper or evaluation report that is not going to get you like high impact factor in top journals, but it's still really valuable for your CV. And that's probably not recognized elsewhere. I published two book chapters during my PhD, and my supervisor told me that I wasted my data because book chapters are way lower in the hierarchy than journal papers. So I chose to come back to the UK because I don't want to play that game. So I want to just be myself. I want to have time and do what I like to do, and just be able to earn a salary. Everything else is not that important to me.
Okay, so let's take what is important to you, and what I want to do is ask about why was, let's say, theatre in prisons in China important to you? What was it that meant that you written about this? It excited you. So tell our listeners about how theatre in a prison setting got you excited.
Yeah. I can talk about it in the way I introduce prison theater to my students, because the presence or the use of theater across international prisons are pretty common if you look. If you haven't looked at this, you probably would think that's a novelty. But because I've been teaching and writing about it, I actually found that it's a thing across different contexts. You have theater companies in many ways, and the way to understand how they're different with each other and what kind of practice they are is I put them on a spectrum. On the one end is instrumental projects, or administrative instrumental projects. And on the other end, it's intrinsic, kind of art for art's sake, intrinsic value. I didn't come up with it. You can find that in literature as well. So the more instrumental projects would be, for example, ones that target specific offense or specific behavioral change. So it's much like behavioral therapy, just using some dramatic elements. And on the very other end of the spectrum would be theater for theater's sake. You're doing a professional, semi-professional production. You're not promising any therapeutic outcome. You're just doing it like you would do with any other community theater company. It's just that the context is special. So one example of that would be the German theater company Aufbuch. They're based in Berlin, and their productions looks very professional. You can actually get tickets from the theater outside to go in and watch their productions. And they do not promise therapeutic outcome. So in coming back to China, that's also kind of my experience with slight variation. So I first went into prison with a drama workshop in 2013-14 during my master's dissertation. I found that the prison authorities and staff members that work in individual prisons as well in China, they are very interested in arts, in criminal justice, in prison, but from a very instrumental perspective. They, in one of their correspondence with me, they termed art and theater drama in particular as technology. I think that captures what they think that is. They see it as a tool to
An
inflict.
instrument of reform.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So they see it as a possible tool, and also, to be honest, they do like the sound of it as a kind of new packaging for their rehabilitation work. So prisons in China different vastly between cities and rural. And in big cities, prisons are pretty used to collaborating with university, but again, mostly in very instrumental ways, mostly with their psychology department on maybe new surveys they've invented, new experiments. They probably would do like a 10 days program, and they would have pre-test and post-test experimental research design to see that if we reduced stress level, if we reduce the cognitive errors, etc. So that's their interest. But as I went on, especially for my PhD project, where it's a long-term project, I lived near the prison for half a year. I was going in at least twice a week. I was doing the drama project in collaboration with a professional stage actor and his theater company. And I was observing. Sometimes I led workshops as well, and I was taking notes, interviewing. And the other side of how theaters used in China became clear to me, and that's also what I'm going to write in my book, which is understanding how theater has been utilized as a form of social control. And that is not new. So you might not be very familiar with Cultural Revolution, but you might vaguely be aware that there's cultural propaganda. There is a lot of adaptation of stage plays, of stories that are utilized for during that time. So it's a historical phenomenon actually, and I've observed that in prison context. How are they organizing prisoners to participate in artistic events, to mobilize them, to redistribute or distribute resources based on their performance, their contribution to the institutional aim, and how that is related or sometimes contradict the rehabilitation goals working towards desistance. So that's a variety of perspectives that you can analyze in terms of theater in China.
That's intriguing to me, because psychologists could use role play to practice rehabilitative behaviors. And you're saying that drama was learning new, helping people to conform so that they could progress in the system as well. So both were about conforming one way or another.
Yeah, so what I'm critiquing about the use of drama in Chinese prison is not really just about China. There is plenty of literature critiquing that in the West as well, how psychology is utilized in systems of control, where when it's combined with criminal justice sanctions, especially for certain offenses. So yeah, and it's very interesting to compare. Then how is it different? How is it similar in terms of the use of arts in institutions of control?
Indeed, and compare, say, for example, in the West, we would think maybe prisons in China were very controlling, but prisons are very controlled environments in the UK or Europe or America. And maybe drama is used in a controlling way just as much in America as it is in China. I want to ask, would you describe yourself as a drama practitioner or a drama therapist, or is that going too far?
I think I would a few years ago when I was still in China. I think I had many more friends who were working as practitioners. I worked myself in a international theater festival between my master's and my PhD full time. So I have lots of friends in the theater circle, and we talk a lot. Sometimes they invite me for projects. I've worked with on projects, for example, on preventing gender-based violence with charities, etc. So yes, at that time, I would definitely say that I'm also a facilitator working in and beyond prison. But currently, for the last few years, I've not really done much facilitation. So for now, I can't really say that. So maybe in the future, I have more opportunity to do that.
But you have it in your background. It's part of your journey. Okay. One just before we leave China, I'm interested about whether the prison authorities were helpful to researchers.
Yeah.
Did they get in the way?
I think, first of all, as I understand, MOJ here has very clear guidelines and process of research access, right? You can apply, you go through process, you're granted or not granted, etc. But in China, there's no such official channel for research to access prison system. So all the access are done through personal relationships. And by that, I don't necessarily mean dodgy relationship. I just mean that you need to go and ask. Maybe maybe you don't have to know anyone personally, but if they're interested in your project, they might say yes. But there's no official channel, which means there's no official provision of oversight. It's really unclear what if you can do it, what's the requirement, how do you make sure or try to find ways to access. So it's very contingent on individual cases. And in terms of once you've established access, like for example, like for my PhD, my observation is that they do not see it as part of their job to contribute to general knowledge of prison.
Okay.
That means that they find it very annoying that they have to help you with your research. And they see it more as a trading process when you have something to offer. So doing drama in prison is a research itself, but it's also my ways of accessing. Because if I'm not giving them anything, I'm pretty sure that they would not to give me access. Prison in China, as you know already, it's the social order or the requirement of order is very different. So in China, prison is a really tightly run ship compared to here. It's very military style. So manpower is sacrificed when you have a researcher inside. They have to have staff members with you all times. They can't really do their other work. So they would not like that if you're not giving anything in return.
I guess it. Um, just another sort of cross-boundary question. You've obviously met prisoners in both a Chinese setting and in a European or a British setting.
Mm.
Do you find prisoners the same the world over, or what are the differences?
So for prisoners in UK, I've not had the chance to have long-term projects. So I've only accessed on one-off visits. I did have a couple of hours of conversations. So it wasn't just like walking past, but it wasn't long term either. So from what I observed, I think first of all, um, the confidence level is definitely very, very different. Um, Prisoners in China, because most of them would come from a very deprived educational background, and they often from very rural background, and because they're subject to very strict military style management in prison, they all seem very timid. They're very unsure of themselves. It takes a long time to build trust, um, and they are very on guard in terms of what they want to tell you. Um, Whereas here, from my limited experience, they are more confident. Um, this is this is on the basis that we were given mostly what we call model prisoners, I think across to both contexts. And that I find really interesting in the UK prison as well. Clearly, we were given where the prisoners that were invited to our activity were very high achieving, highly motivated, very active prisoners that they were doing their education inside. They were thinking about their future. They're yeah. So that in that sense is similar to China as well. Yeah.
Hmm. Maybe that's something similar. The authorities want to show their best face to outsiders, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's also risk control, isn't it? If you're not sure what they're gonna be like dealing with outsiders, then they feel insecure of
Yeah.
interaction.
Okay. I want to ask how you've used podcasting over the last few years.
Mm. So I have a podcast called Prison Desires, 欲望 in Chinese, with a friend who is a documentary maker and who is very focused on the issue of crime, especially prison. And our podcast is focused primarily on arts in prison. Um, it came about, I think, because I do not publish anything in Chinese in terms of academic publication. I could, but I don't. I want to keep a minimum self-censorship in terms of academic writing. But at the same time, it's a shame that I can't talk to Chinese audience directly. Living in China, doing research in China, and yet I'm writing and publishing in English. Um, and my way
And talking and now talking in English.
yeah. Yeah. So my way of finding a way to engage with Chinese audience is podcast. So on the one hand is through the our own podcast where we co-host and interview interesting people. For example, I've interviewed young prison officers on their being disillusioned by the system. We've interviewed ex-offenders. We've interviewed artist practitioners who've done therapeutic art projects in prisons, um, of various different mediums. So for me, and also I attend other podcasts as guests where I talk about the issues that of my research, what I doing in prison, and sometimes just very basic criminology knowledge to the general public. I've also done a kind of a Chinese version of TED Talk, which had a huge viewing and brought me some other connections following up that. So I think that's a way of me doing knowledge dissemination, sharing in the Chinese context.
Yeah, but also it's going back a little bit to your desire to be a journalist and to communicate and to say to other people, hey, this is going on. Are you interested?
Mm.
And that probably is a really good lead-in, Xiaoye, to what we're going to do with our international podcast series. So we're reaching to those of your Chinese audience that can understand English or speak English, but also to people who are interested in how the arts can be used, not just in prisons, but in working in community settings with people who've been in trouble with the law. Because my own experience, background mainly probation, is that the arts can be incredibly powerful. Oh, and by the way, everybody, I also read English at university and did some acting as a young person. So, you know, we've got some stuff in common. So we have some pathways that we have shared together, although different generations, he says extremely quickly. So, shall we share some of our plans, Xiaoye? What are we going to do in this series?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, John, that was your idea to be like it was. I mean, I'm really grateful that you've came up with the idea and invited me to co-host. And I think it's an excellent idea, especially the international part, of course. Just building bridges and building connections. Because doing social media stuff, like I've done blogs and websites before and podcasts, sometimes it's hard to manage balancing that with your own work. And it's also hard when you're thinking about the numbers of your audience. If it's not that high, you're like, oh, is it worth it? But listening to INCJ's podcast, again, it just made me feel like the first achievement or first purpose of this kind of work is to communicate within the field, even within practitioners, among ourselves, among researchers, because everyone is just so busy. And even with my colleagues on the team, we're teaching different modules. We don't sit in the office. I might not even know what they're doing. We could have really exciting collaborations. So I think this series on just arts, I hope to start with that we are building a small platform where interesting parties could come and just have a conversation with each other about what they're doing and finding.
Yeah, and if you want to have a coffee with us on air, write to us and we will be delighted.
Yes.
Informal conversation, we're the people to come for. We're planning to go to the States. We're planning to go to Deutschland. There are certainly one or two connections we want to make in the UK. And Xiaoye is going to set up a way of us talking to one of her colleagues in China, which I am seriously excited about, because INCJ has not reached into China before, and that would be absolutely brilliant. But I think it's important to say that we're interested in a whole variety of aspects about how crime and the arts affects people. And we're not just going to be doing the boring stuff. We also want to examine how the arts are affected by maybe true crime, and how people are in a way drawn into being interested in the wrong things about crime. And we would hope to broaden the audience to ask what offending and the impact upon victims in the broadest sense to be real about criminality rather than unreal. Have I captured that okay, Xiaoye?
Yes, John, like absolutely, especially the last part. I think that's been my very recent thinking and interest is, and which stems from teaching criminology undergrads across two countries, in China as well. And here, lots of young people come to me and say that they've chosen this major almost entirely because of crime drama. But that's contrasted with their difficulty to engage with real issues involving crime and punishment. It seems that they're very confused, that they're not getting this exciting crime drama things when they're actually on the module. They have to learn about social inequality and policy, and they're very much bored of that. So personally, that's my huge interest, is to understand how to bridge that fictional, fantasy-based, entertainment-based interest in fictional crime or true crime or inspired related cultural products, and actually caring about and caring for communities that are impacted by criminal justice systems.
One of our colleagues in INCJ got it exactly right. Caring about and caring for is a really great combo.
Yes.
I think it's time that we had a last word. And Xiaoye, your last word to our international audience about how the arts can contribute to justice. What would your last word be today?
I think instead of me saying something, I would again echo what John said and invite anyone who's worked in conjunction with arts and criminal justice, or if you know any colleagues or friends who has worked in these areas, to contact us and share your story, because experiences can vary greatly, and it's a very lonely thing to sit there and write a paper on your own. So why not come and have a virtual coffee with us? That's a lot better. And you might find new ideas for your next book. So do get in touch.
Absolutely. So we're going to finish off there, everybody. But a really big thank you to our speaker, presenter, interview victim today, who was Xiaoye Zhang. We are planning to reach out, as we've already said, to the USA, Germany, China, Australia, and we have a true crime writer lined up. So in future podcasts, do come back, watch out for us, and thank you very much for listening today. We hope that you, either by watching or listening to this podcast, will enjoy plugging into what's happening at INCJ. Do visit our website at criminaljusticenetwork.net, or visit Spotify or your usual podcast provider to listen to other really fascinating items that are available there. And so it's goodbye from both of us. Goodbye, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you for listening. We will see you next time.
Cheerio. Bye.
Bye. Bye, John.
You have been listening to the INCJ podcast, Conversations about International Criminal Justice. To find out more, go to our website at criminaljusticenetwork.net or follow us on Twitter at INTCJ Network.